History will be made in a couple of hours as all eyes here in Israel and around the world are on The Hague. Welcome to our viewers around the world. I'm Albert Lewitton at the I-24 News headquarters in Tel Aviv. Today is Friday, the 26th of January, 2024, day 112 of Israel at war. There's a lot to get to. In about 2 hours, the International Court of Justice will hand down its decision that could compel Israel to cease and desist in Gaza. We'll have extensive coverage here on I-24 News. On the front lines in Gaza, the IDF is telling all residents on the western side of Khan Yunis, in this map you'll see here, to evacuate it immediately. The IDF says it is encountering intense fighting over there. Dozens of sites have been struck and scores of Hamas fighters were killed. Hundreds of Hamas fighters were captured after they popped out of tunnels. 200 tunnel shafts. On the diplomatic front, CIA Chief Bill Burns, Mossad Chief David Barnea, Qatar's Prime Minister Al Thani, and Egyptian Intelligence Chief Abbas Kamal will meet in the coming days in Europe, trying to make an agreement for the release of the 136 Israeli hostages. But a spat between Israel and Qatar grows deeper. Right-wing Israeli Finance Minister Smotrich accused Qatar of cooperating with terrorists. Those are his words. And now we're moving to the Red Sea. On the Red Sea front, Reuters is reporting China has told Iran to keep the Houthis in check. China is worried that the Houthi attacks on ships is bad for business. There's been a 45% drop of shipping through the Suez Canal, and Egypt says it's wrecking their economy. And on the home front, Fauda actor and Israeli pop star Idan Emedi says he's ready to go back into battle after almost getting killed in Gaza earlier this month. He was part of the hundreds of thousands of reservists who dropped their whole lives to fight. We have live team coverage of every angle of the war. Let me first come into studio with Professor Uzi Rabi. He's the director of the Moshe Dayan Center for Middle East Studies at Tel Aviv University. Thanks so much for joining us. Uzi, there's a lot of discussion. A lot of people, especially around the world, are waking up and they're seeing, is there a deal? Is there no deal? You have the CIA chief headed to meet with Qatar, with the Mossad, and also with 100 different people trying to figure out a solution of any sort. Why is it important that the CIA chief be involved in this?
Well, the United States would like to see sort of a deal between Israel and the Hamas, which would lead to a ceasefire or even more than that. The problem is that we are at a stalemate because Hamas is coming up with a bottom line. Whatever actually the deal is, what is important is the bottom line, which means halting ultimately any war, and this is something that Israel cannot accept. So both countries, I mean, Egypt and Qatar, the interlocutors, have tried actually to close the gaps and come up with something, and it is a stalemate. What I think actually the Paris summit is about, with the CIA being represented there, is to just, as I said before, close the gaps and glean kind of an understanding, which would, in my opinion, would talk about kind of a month or so of a ceasefire in return for release of dozens of hostages and, of course, Palestinian prisoners. We don't know yet actually what the end game would be, but in any case, Yahya Sinwar cannot live with something which is less than stop the war. Israel cannot live with something less than uprooting Hamas and go on with the war.
That's quite a difference. It's quite a gap. It's not exactly something of common ground. I mean,
yeah, but you know, if worse comes to worse for Yahya Sinwar, he, in my opinion, would accept a month or so because he still would entertain himself with the hope that after the month, actually, Israel won't go back to the battlefield. Maybe America or the world is coming up with kind of a pressure belt on Israel, and this would actually bring these things to a halt.
But Uzi, what about all of these ideas of like, oh, maybe there should be a 15-year-long ceasefire. Maybe there should be a long-term ceasefire.
This is what actually Yahya Sinwar would like to have. He would like to go back to status quo ante of the 6th of October and go on, keep living as if the 7th of October was no there.
But the whole world changed.
Yeah, I mean, everything has changed. Israel has changed. Basically, in that sense, Yahya Sinwar knows that he made a mistake. Actually, there was a conception of Hamas that after the last ceasefire or the recent ceasefire, where some of the hostages were released, there was a thought that Israel won't go back to the battlefield. But actually, it didn't materialize.
They broke the ceasefire.
Sorry?
They were forced. Israel was forced to go back into it.
Yeah, but
because Hamas pushed.
I agree, but in my opinion, Yahya Sinwar knows that this time Israel is not in a sort of a round. This is a war, and he carefully listened to what comes from Israel. On the one hand, there is kind of a pressure to release the hostages. On the other hand, there are many Israelis who would say to the government, no way. We actually have sacrificed so much. This time, you should deliver. And delivering this time means uprooting Hamas politically and militarily. And this is actually, I hope, would be the end game here.
Uzi, I'm going to have you hold on for just 1 second because the world is focused on the case against Israel in that International Court of Justice. But remember, the war started on October 7th when thousands of Hamas terrorists invaded southern Israel, killing hundreds of innocent people. Nicole Sedek, our I-24 News correspondent, is joining us from southern Israel, where she's at an event. And Nicole, you were at an event earlier today that brought together all kind of walks of life of Israel.
We truly did see people at this event coming together here at Kibbutz Ruchama from all walks of life. You're exactly correct. We saw religious, ultra-Orthodox, secular, left, right, center. It doesn't matter what everyone's background was. They wanted to come together and have a non-political event to continue to show the importance of unity at the moment. Because right now, it's more important, they say, than ever before to stand united as so many hostages still remain in Hamas captivity. And in addition to this plan, something else that's important right now that they want to talk about is rebuilding the land here in southern Israel. So right here, I'm with one of the trees that they planted. And so this was also part of the event. In addition to coming together in song, in prayer, hand in hand, they also planted deep roots. And there's two parts to this, because on the one hand, it's Tu B'Shvat, which is a Jewish holiday here in Israel, which represents agricultural festivities, the emergence of spring and new life in the land, but also planting deep roots here in Israel, which after October 7th and the massacre, they say planting trees in memory of those who were killed, in memory of those who no longer have a home near, continuing to rebuild the land. They say this is more important than ever before, and especially standing together hand in hand. I spoke to Roy, one of the organizers of the event, who lives here at Kibbutz Ruchama, about the importance of not caring about what your background is, but coming together and really standing. Let's listen to what he had to say.
The concept and the purpose was to bring together a very broad spectrum of Israeli society, both religious, non-religious, right, left-wing, conservative, liberals. The mission was just to have a unity event, and so we insisted on no speeches. We insisted on no symbols that could be construed as political or insinuating any direction or instruction to the government. And we are delighted with the outcome. We've had a remarkable turnout, individuals who represent very, very different views, who have come together in solidarity, both with the families of the kidnapped, but also with one another, and to demonstrate that sitting together under one roof with the idea that we need to be strong and positive is a possible thing, even in this very, very complicated time.
We saw dozens of people come out here today from all over, really. Some coming all the way down from Tel Aviv here to southern Israel to make a stance. And especially this event is coming at a time where more than 3 months, nearly 4 months into the war. And before this all started, we saw Israel divided, political rifts breaking through society. But October 7th was a turning point that brought people back together, standing hand in hand after such a horrible massacre. But now, 4 months later, we're seeing some of those rumblings again breaking through society and some of the political divide with how leadership is dealing with the situation on the ground. And so today's event was to put all of that past us, because they say now is not the time to forget why we came together on October 7th and why we stood united. We cannot forget that now. We have to continue to have this front going forward as war continues.
Nicole Sedek joining us from the southern part of Israel. Thanks so much for joining us. I just want to let our viewers know that we've just gotten word into the I-24 news desk that another soldier has fallen in battle, killed in action. The death toll now of IDF soldiers is 222. 222. I'm joined in studio by Uzi Rabi, the Moshe Dayan Center director, also the Center for Iranian Studies. Moshe Dayan Center is really helping focus an understanding as to this whole region. But if you have a ceasefire, Uzi, if you have a ceasefire with Gaza, with Hamas, it's not necessarily you have a ceasefire with Hamas. There's also this Palestinian Islamic Jihad. There's the Al-Quds brigades. There's the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade. You've got Lebanon, West Bank, the Houthis, Syria, Iraq, Iran.
I think that if there is a ceasefire, as was the case with the recent ceasefire, Hassan Nasrallah actually is going to follow suit. But that would be a temporal thing. I think that what we have here, when we look at the reality, is kind of a real problem. Israel actually has neglected so many things, practically speaking, when it comes to military, when it comes to the border zone. The concept was so wrong. So I think that this is a very instrumental event, this carnage of the 7th of October. Israel has to learn the lesson. This is a wartime. We should be united and keep together in order to help out our IDF actually to just complete the mission. It would take time, but thereafter we'll have actually to start dealing with this whole Middle East in kind of a different way that would prevent the recurrence of such reality in the future. I think that when it comes to the ceasefire that is being agreed in this Paris summit, if at all, it would include also the other factions that you mentioned. But this is just kind of a temporal thing, as I said before. I think that in the end of the day, Israel will not actually, we cannot rule out the possibility of an, kind of a war with Hezbollah in the offing, because we know actually the rockets are there. We should now concentrate on the fence in order to make Radwan forces actually got back, in order to prevent ourselves from the recurrence of the same scenario as was in the south, and let the people of the north get back to their homes. But sooner than later, I think that Israel should to take the initiative, attack surprisingly, so to speak, Hezbollah, and create kind of a different situation here. I hope that the Americans actually are going to side us. We have to just talk to them and be very, very well see eye to eye on this, but we'll have to wait and see. In the meantime, actually, this whole Gaza thing is being broadened up by the Houthis in Yemen, as we see now, by stuff that it comes from Iraq and Syria. So there is a big game here, and it depends to a lot, to a large extent, it depends on the U.S. to see how the American performance actually is going to be, or how they're going to play out the cards, because this is a very, very sensitive issue.
Beluzi, the idea of Israel attacking quietly or surreptitiously into Lebanon changes the dynamic that Israel has always had, which is they've never done an aggressive. It's always been something defensive.
This is a blessed move. It's high time for Israel to do that, because this is something that Israel is gleaning from its toolkit, so to speak. There's no need for saying that Israel actually was the culprit behind the event or something like that. But in my opinion, this is another tool that sends, in my opinion, the right message to leaders of either Hezbollah or Hamas in Lebanon, or Revolutionary Guards, as was the case. Let me just remind me that yesterday Israel attacked kind of a spot that was owned by Iran, and was dealt with all these drones that were to be delivered to Hezbollah.
An airstrip on the southern part of Lebanon.
Yeah, and it was destroyed actually, basically this airspace, but this spot. But what I think here is that, listen, Lebanon and Syria and Iraq are not regular states. They are more than no-man lands. So if we look at reality as it is, this is sort of an Iranian corridor being stretched from Iran to
Right,
the
a front, the
Mediterranean.
United Front, straight through.
So Israel actually is coming up with kind of a new equation. We have to be very determined in that.
But
we
final
have
question about that, Uzi, is that in the eyes of the international world, if Israel were to do this, are you going to see support from the rest of the world? Is going to say, wait a minute, this is not what we signed up for?
Well, listen, I mean, the problem is Iran. And I think it's bigger than the volume of Israel's activity. We have to see actually world powers coming up to the Middle East in order to just put a halt to all these Iranian operation in the region. Let me remind you that they are getting closer to nukes. So nuclear capacity, this is something that would turn this whole Middle East to something else, because Arab states are going to run crazy if that happens. Let us take actually the case study of Saudi Arabia. We have to deal with an iron fist with those bad guys, so to speak. And on the other hand, this whole program of normalization with Saudi Arabia, well, this is the future of the Middle East. I don't think that they became Zion lovers, as we say, but basically those states, Arab states, definitely knows who the enemy is. It is Iran and it is Hamas. They don't like actually Muslim brothers. They know, and they are very well experienced with such, phenomenons. So, in the Middle East, we have to make sure that Israel is going to act in kind of a different way. We have to just inquire into what happened here. And believe me, it's not actually just to point to somebody and say, here is the culprit.
No,
here
it's
is
a fundamental thing.
Yeah, this is the problem. Constructions here are rotten. They are not fit to what Israel needs. So what we have to do is to create something, refresh some of the items and the systems of Israel. The whole notion of what Israel is should be actually recaptured and refreshed, basically. And a new generation is in the offing. Actually, they are fighting now in the battlefield. We have to do something with Israel, because Israel would have to just correspond with 21st realities in the Middle East and beyond in a different manner.
The parallels I'll put up before we go, Uzi, is that the parallels is that in the United States after World War II, the whole idea of American combat was changed after World War II, and it sort of seems as that Israel has to.
In a way, I think that the 7th of October actually serves as, or constitutes, kind of an event that 9/11, Pearl Harbor, I don't know, but this is an instrumental and very cognizant.
Uzi Rabi, the Moshe Dayan Center Director, also the Center for the Iranian Studies from Tel Aviv. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We're getting word in the I-24. El Al has reportedly canceled all service between Tel Aviv and Johannesburg. This comes at the end of March. Now, this latest fallout is because of the court case that South Africa brought up to the International Court of Justice. Now, it might take years to decide whether Israel has or has not committed genocide in Gaza. But I-24 News senior diplomatic correspondent Owen Alterman tells us there's a lot at stake for Israel, and it also depends on how Israel responds.
Decision day in The Hague, with the International Court of Justice set to decide Friday on whether to call for a stop to Israel's campaign in Gaza, a potential provisional measure in South Africa's genocide claim before the World Court, in which that provisional measure might be even higher stakes than the court's final judgment.
The application and request should be dismissed for what they are, a libel designed to deny Israel the right to defend itself according to the law from the unprecedented terrorist onslaught it continues to face.
The ruling on the provisional measure, what Americans would call an injunction, is so important because it happens now, in the middle of the war, when international opinion is focused on the war, and where the court could put itself into a direct clash with Israel.
It is necessary to establish only whether at least some of the acts alleged are capable of falling within the provisions of the Convention.
The court might not go so far as to call for a stop to Israel's military campaign. If the judges do take that step, Israel could still have a response. continuing to argue that such a ruling takes away Israel's right to self-defense, then adding the court had gone beyond the powers given to it by Article 41 of the court's own statute, making the case for Israel to continue the war on the ground and in the court of global public opinion.
You should know that Hamas says that if the International Court of Justice issues an injunction calling for a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, it'll abide by it as long as Israel reciprocates. That's what it says. Hamas also said it's going to release all the Israeli hostages in Gaza if Israel releases all Palestinian prisoners. Now, they didn't exactly say what they meant by all Palestinian prisoners. And that comes from senior Hamas official Osama Hamdan, which you should know he was trained in Tehran. Alan Baker, international law expert and the former Israeli ambassador to Canada, joins us. He's joining us from Har Adar in the West Bank. Thanks so much for joining us, Ambassador.
You're welcome.
Ambassador, you served Canada. Canada, apparently, I'm looking at the list of those countries that support Israel and those who do not support Israel, support South Africa. I don't see Canada on any list.
Indeed, Canada's disappointed Israel, I think. Previous Canadian governments were supportive, but the present government has gone back to the traditional Canadian stance of sitting on the fence and not deciding one way or the other.
I also see some other countries. I mean, look at some of the other countries that support South Africa. Shockingly, Belgium, although they haven't formally said so. A European country, I should say. The others, Algeria, Bangladesh, Bolivia, I mean, you go through the list, it's all like the runs, hits, and errors of autocracy and authoritarianism here.
Look, I don't think the issue here is whether Belgium or any other country supports South Africa or not. The issue here is the legal issue as to whether the South African allegations of genocide are absurd and inane and irrelevant. And this is what Israel has claimed. And if I were an optimist, then I'd like to think that all the judges who've given an oath to judge without bias will accept the fact that there's no genocide here, there's no intention to genocide, and therefore the court can't do anything but throw this case out.
Right, but the idea of a cease and desist order, which is what the South Africans were asking for to be decided, and that's what will be handed down today, or not handed down today, depending on which way the court goes. A cease and desist order, it seems as though the court is being asked to do something that politicians or military people do. I mean, it's not supposed to be part of the legal world.
Exactly. Look, the International Court of Justice isn't the Security Council of the UN. It's not the General Assembly of the UN. It's not a political body. It's a juridical body. It's the senior juridical body of the United Nations. It's a UN organ which speaks for itself, but it's supposed to act in accordance with concepts and norms of international justice. And that's why the whole issue of whether Israel has intended to commit genocide, this is the issue. If there's no intention to commit genocide, then the court can't issue provisional orders because the provisional orders are to prevent continuation of acts of genocide.
One of the things I was trying to go through the order, the request of order for there's 9 sectors of the request of order in terms of cease and desist, suspension of military operations, the prevention of genocide, the prevention of displacement. So at least seems like cease, desist, and humanitarian aid. But one thing I did notice in here is that Hamas isn't listed anywhere in there, especially in the part where prevent genocide or desist from injury to civilians or prevent displacement.
Exactly. This is why the whole thing is absurd. South Africa is acting for Hamas. South Africa, in effect, is the legal arm of Hamas because Hamas is not a state and therefore can't be party to the convention and can't be part of the International Court of Justice. So the South Africans have volunteered to represent a terrible terror organization and to claim claims that are, as I said, absurd and inane.